Welcome to T-Smack, home of the T-Smack. May I take your order?
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Talking Smack, where we talk superheroes, movies, animation, comics, and much, much more. I am your host, Josh Scar, and joining me very specially this week, another guest. We're giving Alex another week off. I am joined by the wonderful, the voluptuous Antonio. Antonio, how you doing?
Voluptuous?
Yeah, I don't know where that one came from, but
I do feel like I am a little bit bigger breasted than I was 10 years ago, but voluptuous. Oh, so good to be back, buddy. Thank you.
It's a complimentary way. I wanted to say something about your voice, and voluptuous came out. It's like, they both start with a V. That's fine.
That works. I mean, I don't think people use the word voluptuous that much anymore, so
It can mean whatever we need it to mean.
we're changing definitions of things all the time, so there we go.
Exactly. Language is constantly evolving. But I'm doing well, and very appreciative again of you coming out and being on the show, and also pushing me, not pushing me in the sense of like, Josh, you need to see this so we can cover this, but just like giving me that little extra push, because I was interested in going to see Furiosa, but I wasn't sure if I could make the time or if I was just like going to be invested enough in it. And we'll get into it in a minute, but just the push was just to have you on the podcast, really. But I am genuinely curious about this movie, which I will get into. But again, thanks for that little extra push.
Of course. I mean, and here's the thing is I listen to your show every week, and why I enjoy it so much is that you guys make the effort to go out to the theater to see movies that I necessarily don't take the time or effort to go see. Like, my podcast is so retro. I cover things that are on my physical media shelves or on streaming or hard to find stuff. And, you know, with a 3-year-old, it's just hard for me to like get out to the theater as much as I used to. But as I say all the time on my show, newer movies often just don't excite me enough to get me to go out and spend, $17 on an IMAX PM screening, right? Not to mention snacks and whatnot. So if I'm going to make the effort to go out to a movie in the theater, it's because I'm super invested either in the director, the cast, or let's just say the saga that it's part of. And for me, Mad Max is one of those things to get me out to the theater. It took me a long time to see the Top Gun Maverick movie. It always takes me a long time to go see the new Marvel, or when Star Wars was a thing. I don't think it's been a thing for a while, even though they keep putting stuff out.
When it was a theatrical thing, yeah.
Yeah, but this one, I mean, day one, night one, I mean, technically it's theatrical releases today, but we saw it last night, and
yeah, the advanced.
I'm so happy that I did, because I don't like hearing all of the hyperbole that a bunch of us, you know, movie bros talk about that sway my opinion one way or another. I had to go in as raw as possible. I barely even watched any trailers. That's how anticipated I was for this movie.
And that's another reason why you kind of pushed me to go see this, is because you don't get excited for new releases very often. So I was like, I got to get Antonio on for this, because one, it's good for SEO, and two, he's excited, which means there's something here. But before we really dive into it, we're going to hear from our friend Caesar over at the No on 15 Allcast, and we'll be right back to talk about Furiosa.
No, I'm 15. No, I'm 15. No, I'm 15. No, I'm 15.
So, what's our show about? It's about some dudes talking about movies, just like this.
With Goofy screaming with them.
So you're talking that they should have replaced it like with a Tom and Jerry scream or something like that?
Tom and Jerry screaming.
Or you might hear something like this.
Oh my gosh.
That whole movie, waiting to see what happens with Blanca, is like the most aggravating thing in that film. But for the most part, we talk movies from the 80s, 90s, and today. And if you grace us with your ear time, you might hear one of these 30-second gems like this.
Yeah, I was gonna say I did not get a chance to watch this one this week.
Give it to him anyways. We're gonna give it to you, anyway. You ready?
I'm gonna give you the 30-second review of Tron Uprising.
All right. Start the clock, and then. So give us a shot and listen to the No on 15 Allcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.
No, I'm 15.
And we're back. Love you, Caesar.
Hi, Caesar.
always love running your promo. We are here to talk about Josh here with Antonio from the Cultworthy, which I didn't give you an opportunity to plug your podcast, Antonio. Go ahead and plug those real quick.
I'm going to do it at the end anyway, but yes, the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast, which is a podcast dedicated to obscure films, hidden gems, and cult cinema of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and today. A podcast of which Josh Scar has been a frequent guest on, and myself on your show, just coming back whenever I have a chance. I think last time I was on the show, I can't remember if it was Godzilla -1 or Suzume. Which one was it? Do you remember?
I think it was -1.
Yeah, I think it might have. Yeah,
I think Suzume was like October, November, and then -1 was, I think, like one of our first episodes of the year, one of our last episodes of 2023.
Gotcha. Because -1 again was another thing that was going to get me into the theater and onto your podcast because I was so excited to see it. And I saw it twice, and I rarely see films twice in the theater. So anyway, Cultworthy Cinema Podcast, as well as my other show. I can't really say new show because it's 22 episodes deep now. I guess that's kind of new. And that is Back to the Balcony with our friend Justin Henson from the Movie Wire as my co-host, where we discuss films that were covered by Siskel and Ebert, and then we critique their critique. And that's just been a lot of fun. Gives me a chance to see Justin every week and go back and dig up some movies that aren't necessarily our favorite movies. We really are basing them off of how good the review or the conversation or debate was between Siskel and Ebert, and that's how we're choosing them. And it's just been a pretty wild ride for the last few months doing that show. So yeah, check both of those out.
At time of recording, your most recent episode is on Great Balls of Fire, which I have only seen that movie once, and I think it was on like my local WGN channel back in the early 2000s. Like I remember seeing Dennis Quaid at the piano doing the crazy piano playing, thinking like, oh, okay, that's fun. He's singing Great Balls of Fire, I like that song. And then I changed the channel almost immediately. So like that's as much of that movie as I had seen, and seeing you guys cover it is like, oh yeah, I remember that was a thing I saw on TV once. And just hearing you guys talk about it, and didn't know that there was a sex scene with, I didn't even know Winona Ryder was in the movie, let alone there was a sex scene in it. And I like hearing you, especially Antonio, going out of your comfort zone, because I know musicals are not necessarily your thing, but especially musical biopics are not
They're
your
my
thing.
least favorite thing. And movies like this are the reason why.
And I totally get why biopics are not your thing. Like they're very cookie cutter. You go like very surface level with whatever addiction they have, and then you just supplement it with songs that you know everyone loves.
Right.
And everyone feels good, but you're just playing that emotional roller coaster. It's just manipulative and very cheap and easy to do to get a rise out of people and get an emotional response out of people.
And that's the thing. Like, I'll take a side tangent really quick. Just to explain, you explained it perfectly, but even more so for me, the reason why I cannot stand musical biopics is because you need the music of the recording artist in your movie. So you can't tell a true story about how terrible these people were, because then they're not going to let you use the music. So there is like a real self-serving aspect to that particular genre, where it's like, I need to really bullshit and kiss this guy's ass as I'm telling a story because I need to use his songs, because no one cares about the movie if we can't use his songs. So that's one of the other big reasons. But yeah.
To use that as a wonderful segue into what we're going to talk about here, Chris Hemsworth was tied to star in a Hulk Hogan biopic.
I remember this.
At the very least, it has entered development hell. If it's not already just completely dead. But Hemsworth was getting super jacked to play Hulk Hogan. And I was really interested to see this movie because Hulk Hogan is such a larger than life character. And I wanted to know how far into the bullshit were we going to get with Hulk Hogan stories, because he has told so many lies, and there's so many videos on the lies that he's told. Like there's an episode of MTV's Cribs where he like pulls a pair of boots off his shelf. He's like, these are my favorite boots in the world. I fought Andre the Giant in these boots. A week later, he died. But there is record of Hulk Hogan's last match with Andre the Giant was in like 1989 or 1990. And Andre passed away in like 1992, 1993. And Andre the Giant was working in Japan at the time, where Hulk Hogan was just coming back and working back in the WWE. Yeah. That's like one of his surface level lies. There's so many other ones that you could really dive into. So like with Hulk Hogan being in there and having his favorite phrase, creative control on the story, like, were we going to get a Weird Al level story that you're just like, this is so much bullshit, there's no way any of this is true? Or were we actually going to get something interesting? Either way, I think seeing Chris Hemsworth portray Hulk Hogan was going to be interesting.
Well, I was afraid for him, man, because like when we started seeing him bulk up for it, he wasn't even nearly close to the real mass of the real Hulk Hogan. So I was just really wondering, like, how far is this guy going to take it? Like, is he really going to add like
I don't
another,
know, those biceps guys, huge.
like, is he going to add like another 80
saw videos
pounds
of
of
him doing
muscle?
his
Like,
workout.
I was very concerned for his health. So when that kind of just fizzled away, it made me feel better about Mr. Hemsworth, because I was like, oh, that sounds dangerous, bro. It sounds like the reverse of what Christian Bale does, you know? Now that we're on to the Hemsworth part, as we jump into the conversation about this, I just got to say, first and foremost, I've never not liked Chris Hemsworth. I've just always felt that the projects that he's been in aren't necessarily my cup of tea. I'm not going to lie. Like, I heard your guys's, the one that you did with Dan about top tier, like tier level casting choices. And I totally agreed with what you said about Hemsworth as Thor. Like, he is a good Thor for as much as I consider Thor should be cinematically. But also I feel like he just never finds like a project that really fits him as an actor. It's all aesthetic. It's like, we need to cast the buff, beautiful, blonde guy, right? Now, I can go back to his earlier stuff like Cabin in the Woods, and I don't count Red Dawn because it was on the shelf for like 5-6 years before they put it out. So that was pre-fame.
Sure.
But I'm going to tell you right now.
Well, wasn't Cabin in the Woods too? That was on the shelf for like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, but like Red Dawn was on the shelf even longer. Red Dawn was on the shelf for so long that they literally had to change the country from China to Korea. Like, that's, with all the political things that happened, they had to go back and change the country that they were going to war with. So yeah, things like that happen. So, I mean, he's not hurting for money. He's not hurting for opportunity. I was just really happy to see him take this role as a villain and be able to use like his hammy comic chops a little bit in it, but still bring some dramatic quality to it. It's one of my favorite aspects of the movie when we get into it, but it's a redemption story for me for Chris Hemsworth, because I was really just kind of convinced that, oh, he is just the guy that makes Russo brother movies now, right? Like, that's kind of how I've been seeing him lately with the stuff he's been putting out on Netflix, and now that the MCU's kind of done.
I think he can be an Arnold Schwarzenegger type. If you get him with a James Cameron type, a guy who can utilize what he does well along with his physicality, he can be really good, and you can appreciate what he brings to the table. And let's just dive right into it, because I think his Dementis was the best part of this movie. And that could also partly be because he's the only one that gets to have any real charisma in this movie. But I do want to backtrack a little bit, because I do need to say, before anyone gets really mad at me, I have never seen a Mad Max movie.
That's what got me excited about this conversation. I was like, you're going to come in so raw to this, and it's going to give me opportunities to fill in some backstory and some nuance. So yeah, I'm all here for it.
My father-in-law gifted me a copy of Fury Road. I redeemed the digital copy. I have the Blu-ray. I don't know why I've never bothered popping it in. I think it's partly because I don't think it's something Ricky wants to watch. So I have to find the time where she's not around and the kids aren't around, and I can watch a 2.5-hour movie that is probably going to upset the the women in my house. So it's one of those things where it's just, would I rather spend time watching this, or would I rather spend time with my family? And usually family wins out. After seeing this, I definitely want to go back and see Fury Road just to see what gaps are filled in with this movie.
I'm going to say, man, if there's ever a sci-fi action post-apocalyptic movie that would be attractive to a female audience, it's Fury Road. Don't let the title Mad Max sway you. It's a very strong feminist, female-driven movie where Charlize Theron's Furiosa essentially is the main character of the movie. It's just told in the Mad Max universe, and there's a lot of debate from like film bros and people who actually know what they're talking about that, where it's like, okay, this is Mad Max's movie, but this is Furiosa's story. Driven to that point so hard that, 7-8 years later, George Miller now makes a prequel to Fury Road telling the origin story of Furiosa. That's how positive he is that Fury Road was the Furiosa story, and now here is our origin. Like, I don't.
That's actually a really good counterpoint to one of my hesitations towards entering the Mad Max arena, for lack of a better word, Thunderdome, because part of the reason why I don't bring it up with my family or watch it in passing with my family around is, for me at least, there is a presumed violence factor, which this movie surprisingly is not that gory or violent. Like, there's weapons and people getting run over and like headshots, but it's more like BDSM stuff than it is overly violent or even like lots of language.
You know, that takes the cue from the world building that George Miller did with the original Mad Max movies, especially Road Warrior, where the first Mad Max film, it's like the verge of the apocalypse, right? Like, it takes place in essentially just the near future. We're not in the wasteland yet, but gas is becoming scarce, and the different things that are falling apart politically and in society, that is what that film is about, how like street gangs are starting to become more prevalent. And then Road Warrior, which is part 2, it just takes us right into the wasteland. And yeah, I agree with you. There is a very strong theme in the first 3 movies that in the wasteland, you're going to have these real male-dominant societies that essentially is like, what would you do if a bunch of men got together and become savages? Well, they're essentially going to cosplay the apocalypse. And that's kind of what the first 3 movies are. You know, they're wearing tires as armor and football gear, and everything's got spikes in it. And there is like a BDSM aesthetic to it, because in a way, I think that's George Miller saying the toxic side of the male species, when left to its own devices without any real control and falling under the spell and seduction of warlords, because that's what the survival aspect will be. I don't doubt that for a second. Like, if and when the end of the world comes, we hit this apocalyptic thing, it's going to be warlords that are going to like create new societies. I believe that 100%.
Yeah.
And this is just them kind of glamorizing that, saying, all right, well, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to get football gear and tires and spikes and chains, and they're going to just look ridiculous, but also ominous. That is the first 3. There aren't a lot of female characters, and the female characters that there are victimized, because I think that tells a story of what the future apocalyptic world would kind of look like. Thunderdome does it a little bit differently, where Tina Turner is a warlord herself. They kind of flip the narrative on that. So I think that was one of the big things that when Fury Road came out, it divided a lot of people, even though a lot of people agree with me. It's probably one of the best films of the 21st century, especially when it came out theatrically. Like, to see it in the theater was just epic. But it did tell a different story. It told a story of, you know, women escaping captivity and women escaping the idea of like they are just there to be bred or to be milkmaids, essentially, is what the future holds. And this film is kind of like the origin of that. And I think it does it really well. But also, I want to talk to like the asexuality of Furiosa, where we have a female character, but we don't have to really dive into, let's say, the romantic relationships or sexual desires of a woman who has had to go through all of this stuff growing up. And when she does have a human connection, which we'll get to later, it's one merely of like respect that there is like a somewhat decent human being out there. It just happens to be a guy. It could have been a girl too, but the movie doesn't delve into, you know, oh, well, what was her romance life like? Like, what was her love life like? It doesn't do that. And I appreciated the hell out of it for it.
I do think that's one of my bigger plot hole points, though, not necessarily that she didn't have a love interest. But there are moments in this movie where I feel like it's leading towards a story thread, and then it just never goes anywhere. Because towards the end of, I think it's the second chapter, this movie is broken into, I believe, 5 chapters.
Which the other films don't do that. So it's an interesting storytelling device that Miller uses.
Yeah, and they use voiceover a couple of times to narrate as well with the history men or whatever. But towards the end of the second chapter, when maybe it's the second chapter, maybe it's the third one. I can't quite remember. When Furiosa is given over to Immortan Joe, his son Rectus he is just immediately enthralled with her because she has like jangles bells in her hair. I'm guessing that it just triggers some kind of juvenile attraction in him, but he just like he's more interested in the bells in her hair than any kind of physicalness. It feels like there's an unfinished storyline there where she's avoiding him and trying to make sure he doesn't recognize her. And he kind of does for a moment, and then immediately something happens and he forgets about it. And then it just never comes up again. And it feels like there's a few times where that happens. Mainly the thing that I thought this was building towards was her revealing her name. It's called Furiosa. She doesn't talk to anyone. Whenever anyone asks her name, she doesn't respond. Even Dementis, played by Chris Hemsworth, he just calls her Little D because he doesn't know her name. And he's so vain that he's just like, all right, you're gonna be Dementis Jr. Like that's your name now. Towards the end of the movie, when she comes out of a wellness hole, essentially, but it's not a wellness hole.
It's like a maggot farm.
Yeah. When she comes out of this hole, she immediately finds a guard to get up to Morton Joe, and she's like, I'm Praetorian Furiosa. And it's supposed to mean something, but like, as far as I'm aware at this point in the movie, which I believe it's towards the end of the 4th chapter, no one knows her name.
I assume they do, though, because she has now built up enough time with Praetorian Jack, who is like her mentor, right? And in Fury Road, that is who she becomes. She becomes the Praetorian of the Citadel. She's like the most respected person in the Citadel that's not a warlord or a war boy. She's a very specific skill. And I totally bought that particular aspect of the movie because she is, after she has helped save the war rig on that initial run, where she is just the black thumb. She's the mechanic that's underneath the truck. And as she like essentially saves the mission and becomes the pupil of Praetorian Jack, in my opinion, from that point on, how many years that ends up being, she's just riding in the cab with them and she's wearing the Praetorian makeup. So they know that she is a person of importance and they don't mess with her. They never knew her name in youth, so they aren't going to assume that she was Little D or the child future bride of a Morton Joe. They just assume that if you don't live in the Citadel, you're dead. So I don't think Rictus was afraid of her showing up in the future after she escaped, because in his mind, well, she's not going to survive the wasteland. She's a child. But he also doesn't know that she has a survival's instinct and a survivor's nature based on where she came from.
And I think that's something that is really awesome about this movie. But I think that general audiences like me who have never seen even just Fury Road, it's going to get a little lost on them, is that I think George Miller gives the audience enough faith to fill in gaps that he, like you said, like that's the logical jumping in point, is that at some point in this time, she has told them her name. But as far as the narratively within the context of the movie, that's the first time she has said her own name even. We have heard her little sister at the beginning say her name. We've heard her mother say her name, but she has never said, I am Furiosa. And I think that's what was kind of missing for me from a narrative standpoint with this, is that it did feel like it was building up towards her being like, even just saying in any kind of context, I'm Furiosa, telling someone who she genuinely is. And with Praetorian Jack, like it would make sense when he comes back for her after that amazing 15-minute chase scene where she just says, I'm Furiosa, and like shakes his hand or something, like just some kind of verbal cue that like, okay, she trusts this guy. And instead it's just him making a promise to her that like, do this with me. By the end of it, you'll get to go do whatever it is you're trying to get to. And that like, okay, yeah, that's also a verbal visual cue for the audience to know this guy is trustable. But there's nothing from Furiosa that ever really says like, this is the moment where I have trusted this person.
Yeah.
It's a gap that the audience needs to fill in, because we see that, oh, there's a time jump. She's got the war paint on and all these other things, which I think is genuinely a good thing, because we don't need to be spoon fed all this stuff. But general audiences do also kind of need that.
I agree with you. And this is a trope in the Mad Max saga for sure. You know, in the first film, you are given a lot of backstory of why Max is the way he is, but then they don't even mention it in the second or the third. And Fury Road, it's a hot topic debate that Tom Hardy isn't even actually the same Max Rockatansky that Mel Gibson is. There's a lot of visual cues. For one, the time frame does not match if it was the original character. There is a character in Road Warrior who's this little feral child that is actually the narrator of that movie, and it's agreed on by like Mad Max files like myself that Tom Hardy's Mad Max is actually this child grown up who has taken the persona of Max. So Max almost becomes like a Robin Hood type figure, or like a mythical figure that's roaming the wasteland. I feel they're trying to do the same thing with Furiosa, where this is a character that, I mean, she only has like 30 lines of dialogue in the whole movie.
Yeah, I looked it up. She has 30 lines.
There is I think a particular type of character building that they're doing where it's like, we don't want to humanize this character too much, because if they choose to follow this character through more films, whether it's Anya Taylor-Joy coming back and doing it again, or going back and doing it with Charlize and what the future of the Citadel is, let's say a sequel to Fury Road, there has to be some kind of mystere to that character, because that is essentially the characters. Like the man with no name, like the Clint Eastwood trope, right? Comes into a town, shakes the town up, but we really don't know what his motivation is, who he is. He's just there for money or survival or assets. Like I think that's what they were trying to do here. But I also got to give credit, man, where like this is such an interesting situation. My episode coming out next week is really about this, about sequels and what can really be considered a sequel, or what can be considered like a restart. I'm not gonna say a reboot, but we were talking about Evil Dead 2. Is Evil Dead 2 really a sequel, or is it just a do-over with more money and better assets to tell a story with? This is a weird one because it's a prequel to a sequel that doesn't necessarily follow the original story of the world building the first 3 films did. That can be tricky as a screenwriter, man, where it's like, okay, you've now told a story in Fury Road, and now you are going to go back and tell an origin story of a character that's not the title character of that film. But you have to be careful not to create too many plot holes or inconsistencies of storytelling and character building with that. And I'm going to tell you right now, there are some inconsistencies with the character building. You really wouldn't know because you haven't seen Fury Road, but a lot of the characters that are in the Citadel, like the People Eater and the Bullet Farmer and Immortan Joe and his sons, they're all in Fury Road. And here we are a decade later, and they are a decade older, and it is kind of obvious that they're older than they are in Fury Road. That did cause me a little bit of suspension of disbelief of like, okay, well, why do they look so much older when this is literally like 15 years earlier than that one is? But that's okay. The problem is, I think that they didn't have to rely on using those characters that we are familiar with from this previous entry as such big plot drivers of this film. I don't think that was necessary. I think that was something to do, just kind of like have enough familiarity for people who watched Fury Road in the theater and maybe didn't watch it again until this. But that did throw me out a little bit because it does take us away from Dementis. It spends a little bit too much time of her developing her personality and her skills as a mechanic while building this war rig under Immortan Joe and his warlords, that when that second part happens in that second act as we're learning her development, it just made me miss Dementis more. Like I wanted to know what was going on, because by the time she is now Furiosa, was apprentice to
the protagonist that we
know, and the apprentice to Praetorian Jack, by the time we get back to Dementis, we find out that he's actually a real incompetent leader, and everything that he is running and ruling in Gastown is turning into an uprising. Now, I thought that was really interesting because for a warlord, he's got that charm and charisma, but apparently he is not a very strong leader, and that is where things start falling apart for this like tri-city regime. And I'm telling you, man, it kind of felt like a political metaphor and allegory to things that we're seeing today, where it's like we have like these real bombastic characters in control, and they feel and act like they're in control, but behind the scenes, things are really falling apart. And I thought that was a really clever use of character and storytelling, especially with his role.
when we're reintroduced to Dementus after we shift into Anya Taylor-Joy as Furiosa, as more adult Furiosa, I was a little surprised and taken aback by Dementus being a little inept as a leader. Apparently, having apparently part of his journey is that they're a roaming biker gang essentially that is looking for a home, and so he tries to take the Citadel. Immortan Joe puts on a big show of strength. And then he decides, oh, well, Immortan Joe has control over Gastown. Let's Trojan horse that bitch and take it. And it's like really smart. And he does it really easily. And then when we get that time jump, after we get I think the sequence is called like Road to Nowhere or something like that. After that sequence, which we need to talk about that one. That one is fantastic. And I do have a genuine question that I'm not sure if my theater was broken or if it was intentional, but we'll get to it. But once they take Gastown, and once we see that it's kind of hitting a point of uprisings, as you said, there's a sequence where they try to escape, or where they escape, and he's leading them. And he's like being very honorable about it. He leads them out, and he's like, "Hey, 3 days. Tell Immortan Joe 3 days at noon. I'll be there." And he leads them out. And I was like, that's weirdly. What's the word I'm looking for? I said honorable, but I was looking for another word. But it was a really interesting show of like potential desperation from him, but I'm also not curious if it's not like a Joker plan where he knows what's going to happen, or he has staged the uprising for the food just so he can get them to scatter and be a little more hectic about like he's losing control. We have an opportunity to take it back, and all these other things that are going on. But the movie never really dives further into it. But his desperation also leads him to taking Bullet Town, and that he's like trying to just acquire assets so he can eventually take over the Citadel, which if he's a bad leader and he's doing that, but he's able to do all these other things, it's interesting. And like you said, we get less of what makes that story interesting because we want to see, is he really competent? Is he incompetent? What are these inconsistencies, and what are they building towards, or what do they mean for his character?
I think that the way that I perceived it is that this is a guy who is very reactionary, and he's very good at getting what he wants. He's terrible at keeping it. And that kind of is his whole journey as a character throughout the entire movie. You know, like the little teddy bear he wears on his belt, which was his kid's. It's kind of like a totemistic representation of that, where he is really good at gathering supplies, at gathering resources, but he's really bad at keeping them. Like even at the very beginning, when Furiosa is kidnapped and taken to their roving biker camp, yeah, he is in charge, but there's distension amongst the ranks already. You know, he has to resort to these real extreme displays of violence, almost like Commodus and Gladiator, right?
Yeah.
Where the best way you can control the people is by showing how violent and
horrific,
just terrible you are as a warlord, and the hostility towards, and the zero respect for human life. And a lot of his grandiose speeches are like that. Again, I feel like there is such a political allegory to this, where all of his speeches and his microphone, his grand entrances, it'd be like watching a Trump rally or any kind of political party where you're getting your people excited because you're really charming the pants off them, but you have no plan of sustainability. And that's why they're always looking for a new home. I mean, you can tell that they are just strip whatever resources they have too quickly. They don't know how to monitor it. Now, Immortan Joe is like one of the best villains ever, in my opinion, especially in Fury Road. He's not really used to his best potential here, but it's just kind of setting him up for what Fury Road does. He has it under control. Like the hostility and warlord aspect of this guy, he really knows how to keep his people under control. He knows how to give and take to keep that status quo and sustainability to run these three, war cities, where Dementus doesn't have that. Like we find out that his the Octoboss, the guy with the octopus flying helicopter and the horns, awesome character.
Yeah, great.
But we find out that he was like a henchman for him at the beginning, and then we find out that he went rogue at some point. So you can already tell that he does not have good control over his people. He's got like his Furious Five essentially that follow him blindly and will do anything for him, like his assassins, his Trojan horse guys. But he just doesn't know how to keep control beyond the point of like, I'm just going to tear people apart with motorcycles. That's his challenge. And you know that if he took over the Citadel, he would just ruin it. He even says so at the very beginning when he tries to take it. He's like, if you guys help me overturn your leaders, you can have all of what you want whenever you want, because he doesn't understand the sustainability of something. He is essentially a virus that just goes in and destroys the resources of whatever environment he's taken over. So yeah, I liked that aspect of it because it gives us a villain that to me seems more dangerous because they're not as calculated as we're used to some villains being.
Yeah, and that's a really great point about how he has no ability to ration anything. He doesn't understand how to portion anything out to retain sustainability. He's just like, enjoy it while you can because it's not going to last. And it's only not going to last because you're not interested in being able to sustain it.
There's a perfect moment of that explains it perfectly, where it's like Dementus and his crew, they just ride their motorcycles and burn fuel all day, right? Like it's that grand display of a horde. We're going to hoard you. And then once Immortan Joe finds out that Gastown has been taken, his first order of business is everyone shut down the generators, shut down this, shut down your vehicles. We're not going to expel any gas. We have to ration instantly. Like that is the true leader moment for him. It's like, okay, he is a vicious warlord, but he has that sense of leadership and sustainability that is going to outlast whatever Dementus has up his sleeve.
Yeah, he understands that it would be a war of attrition and that Dementus would not be able to survive a war of attrition. And what you brought up regarding Dementus's inability to sustain and the understanding how precious resources are, again, never have I seen a Mad Max movie prior to this. And I think they do a pretty good job with the opening narration where there's like little radio clips or TV clips. It's just all audio where you get news story bites of like, oh, this has happened and water is drying up, gas is becoming more expensive, blah, blah, blah.
And like each Mad Max film starts that same way. It all starts with some kind of newsreel or soundbite.
Which is a great way to introduce newbies into this universe to kind of let them understand the stakes. But you get a better understanding of just how precious these resources are in the chase scene once the Raiders take Furiosa, because they find her oasis home. They don't find like the settlement within the oasis, but they like find a horse and they're chopping it up for bits. This is kind of where I feel like Furiosa's journey is a very different kind of hero's journey. And I'm curious like how you feel about her narrative, because it seems like she's just always been Furiosa for the most part, because usually the trope would be you live in this idyllic Eden of an oasis in a world that's just sand and dirt, and you get to live in this world of green with fruit and peace. But you have invaders. What's the first thing the kid in these movies does is they go and tell the adults. And then one kid's going to be curious and they're going to get kidnapped because they're dumb. In this, we see that, yes, they live in a peaceful, idyllic society within this wasteland, but they have been raised to know what to do if they encounter someone that is not from their group. And that is cut the gas lines, make sure no one leaves so they can't tell anyone where you are. And so Furiosa tells her younger sister be invisible. She goes and cuts a couple of gas lines. She does get caught, but it doesn't feel like it's because she was stupid. It genuinely just feels like, oh, she miscalculated and someone saw her. But we see that from a young age, she is capable. She's not being hardened, and she's not just like, fine, I'll just kill. It's not like in Fallout with the Okie Dokie girl. Where she becomes hardened over time because she grew up in this idyllic vault, and now she's spent time in the wasteland and understands she needs to be violent to survive. Furiosa knows from a young age she needs to be violent to survive in this whole place. But then the chase ensues after she's taken, and you see moments where her mom snipes a guy and they immediately turn around and get the gas tanks and get a tire. And like, these resources are precious. I'm like, you're establishing something that makes sense. And it's a great visual representation of what the audience needs to understand about this world. Because yeah, we see Dementis wasting fuel, but you see also the minute they stop riding, they turn off the engine. Anytime they stop, the engine goes off because you can't idle and just burn gas.
And there's some interesting character and world building too, where so it's not her little sister in the beginning. It's a character named Valkyrie who's actually got a really big role in Fury Road.
Oh.
And it's an interesting idea where if you've seen Fury Road, that tribe, they are not pacifists. They are actually very skilled warriors that help keep their tribe secret. You can tell by like the skill that her mom has.
Yeah, they
sniping
can
people.
snipe people while on motorcycles.
Yeah,
at a distance.
and I loved her character, Charlie Fraser as Mary Chabasa. She was just so good. And I think that's going to be a complaint that you might hear from people is that they spend a little too much time with Child Furiosa. And I get that. But when you love the character as much as I do, then you're definitely going to feel like this was a warranted story. This is a warranted backstory and story and character building. And yeah, I absolutely loved that.
Yeah, I don't think I would complain at all about how much time we spent with young Furiosa. I was just waiting for the time jump, really, because I'm like, Anya Taylor-Joy is title on the lead card here. So when are we getting there? It was a pleasant surprise that they're not just rushing to get to the point where it's like, oh, and here's the lead actress that everyone knows with the giant eyes. They take their time. They tell the story that they want to tell. And I think that, again, is George Miller letting the audience know that he's here to tell a story. He's not here to give them what they want. And I think that's a really, really important thing in Hollywood right now is directors get to share their vision and not just make a movie by algorithm.
I'm glad you said that, because here's the thing is that pretty much every Mad Max movie has followed a certain formula. And that is, you've got Mad Max it's been Mad Max in every film, enters a scene, comes across a tribe of warlords, and then you've got all your different conflicts and double twists and stuff like that. And then 40 minutes of a chase scene to finish off your movie, like the climactic chase scene. I was so relieved with this film that it didn't follow that trope, because I know he was expecting people to think, oh, well, I can't wait for the ending chase scene. Well, they don't give you one. They tell the story of Furiosa and they put all the fantastic chase scenes all throughout the movie. So it doesn't feel like a formulaic Mad Max movie. You're in the universe. You know that you're in the Mad Max world and you're dealing with characters that you're familiar with from the other films. In fact, Mad Max even gets a cameo for a second. I know we're already in spoiler territory, but she essentially is rescued and taken back to the Citadel after she loses her arm by a mysterious character who it can't be anyone but a version of Max. Whether it's Tom Hardy's Max, I don't know, but you've got the Interceptor car. You see it out in the valley. It's a really cool little twist and nod. Yeah, but that's the thing is that they put the chase scenes and the vehicular combat all throughout the movie instead of following the standard Mad Max protocol of opening exposition, conflict, 40-minute chase scene. And I loved it. And I think that some people are going to be like, well, it's not as good as Fury Road because it doesn't have as a big of a climax. It doesn't need it. To me, it felt more like a Japanese samurai revenge story, or maybe like in Kill Bill Volume 2, how it took the energy way down and focused on character instead of visual violence. Mm-hmm. So I liked that. I was a big fan of it. And I have seen people complain about not following the trope, and that's fine. I think it's brave, but I also think that Fury Road was so good, it gave him license to be more experimental with his storytelling of how he wanted to tell this particular story.
And even so, the chase sequences, or at least the driving sequences, I wouldn't even say they're chase sequences in this one. Almost all of them are heist sequences.
Yeah, like vehicular combat. Yeah, heisting and all that stuff.
The Road to Nowhere, that sequence alone is 15 minutes of just nonstop action with escalating stakes, because you start off with the raiders trying to just ride up alongside it, the giant trucker trying to get on board. That doesn't work. All of a sudden they have parasails. those parasails that are attached to the cars don't work. They have parasails with fans where they can now fly free roaming. That doesn't work. The Octoboss shows up and he's got an
He's like
amazing
this gyrocopter.
yeah. And the escalation of that scene takes place over 15 minutes and it's nonstop action and it's fantastic. And you also get some little Mad Max universe touches. Like there's a bunch of little freaks in there that show up to be freaks and then they die. Like again, never seen a Mad Max. I know that's a trope of Mad Max.
It definitely is.
But it shows how Furiosa has grown as a person within the Citadel and creating usefulness for herself because she's just tagging along underneath this giant truck, literally just dangling there waiting for her turn to be needed. And she saves the day because she's the main character, but it always feels like you can fill in the gaps to the point where you're like, yeah, okay, I understand. It's been years. She's trained. She's learned. I will say with that chase scene or that heist sequence or attempted heist sequence, was there music in that sequence? I think I got 5 or 10 minutes into that sequence and I'm like, is this all just like ambient noise with like occasional little drum beats thrown in there?
That's definitely how most Mad Max films work is once the vehicular combat starts, they shut the soundtrack off. They just let the sound of the gears and the tires and the crash and the explosions happen. It's great. One of the best things about Fury Road, when you go back and rewatch it, because now you have to, is the Immortan Joe has what he's called the Doof Warrior, and it's that truck rig that has all the big speakers.
The one thing everyone has seen from Fury Road with the giant
with a guitar guy.
Yeah.
That is what creates the score. So while you're having these vehicular combat scenes, the score of the movie is the drum beats for the war battle, and then this guy playing these heavy metal riffs, and that is what's actually scoring the scene, is what this guy is doing in scene. It's very, very meta. It's really cool. But this one is really more focused on the sound of the machinery. Like the machinery is almost its own music, and I think that's one of the coolest parts about it. And so I also think that like when you have a guy pop up out of nowhere, you know, the typical trope of an action film or suspense film is you're going to have a rising score behind it that's going to lead to like the big dun-dun-dun.
Yeah.
And you don't get that. Instead, they bring it with visual aesthetics. A George Miller ism that I really like is that he does a lot of quick close-ups of people behind the wheel. You know, so like so many times the camera literally just zooms right through the windshield into the person's face, whether it's Hemsworth or whether it's Anya Taylor-Joy. Like that is such a George Miller thing. And I never get tired of it because it's like octane filmmaking, right? Like it never slows down the energy and the pace and the drive of what the action is doing.
I think that did throw me for a little bit because there are moments. I don't know if it's. I'm curious to look at the projection stats of this because it does feel like there are moments where the frames per second speed up, and I don't know if
I definitely noticed that. Yes,
and
I
it's
noticed that
really
too.
jarring, and it does not look quite right. And I'm wondering how intentional that is, or if that's more just maybe limitations from my theater because my theater is almost 30 years old at this point, and I'm not sure when they last updated their projectors.
Now, I saw it on IMAX, and I felt the same way. I felt like there was, I'm not going to say lag, but there was definitely like some frame rate inconsistencies that I just took as like an aesthetic touch, like something they were doing. When Miller was making these movies on film back in the day, he would undercrank everything to make everything seem faster. And when you do that with film with good old-fashioned 35 millimeter technology, it works. It's obvious, but it works. It fits with whatever that particular style of filmmaking was back then. I think that he was trying to find a way to do that same kind of visual aesthetic, but with modern technology, especially with IMAX and digital now. And if you do have a lot more CG than you used to, how do you adjust the frame rate of CG versus practical in the same frame and still try and get that same kind of feel of like undercranking the camera? That's what my guess is of why it is, and it was jarring in a few moments. There is a lot more CG in this movie than in Fury Road. Like, that was one of the things I thought was really interesting, was that Fury Road was it was championed for using so much practical effects in all of its filmmaking.
And they would just touch up little things here and there with CGI.
Where this one, it does rely a lot heavier on CG. And there were some moments where I I did not let it take me out of the movie, but there are some moments where it's like, okay, you see these cars driving through the wasteland, but they're not leaving tire tracks. Like you see dust, but you don't see a tire track. I'm like, that feels like it was a rushed special effect. But I didn't let it take me out of the movie because the movie to me was just so immersive. I was willing to let little things like that go. But if it was a shit movie, I would have just pinpointed it right away and been like, hey, you guys need to work on your consistency of how you're doing your tracks through the dirt as your cars are driving through the desert.
There is one moment that took me out of the movie with bad CGI, and it's fairly early in the movie. It's towards the end of chapter 2 when Furiosa is entered into the bride's chambers. We see this like beautiful spa-like room with this stone staircase, and there's people bathing, and you just see all these beautiful women in these lacy white robes, and there's this high frame rate CGI person walking down the stairs in the back room, and they're not walking like a person.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I get that you're trying to make this place look lived in, but those are stairs. People use them. You don't need someone to come walking down to let me know that people live upstairs. Those are stairs for a reason. I even if it's a decorative wall that is steps, I don't care enough to be like, I wonder where those stairs go.
There were a few moments of that. I'm not going to lie. There were a few moments of that were obvious to me, but like I said, I was able to let them go pretty easily.
Most everything else I was pretty good with, but it was it was just that one really poorly CGI'd person. Like, who made that decision? Was it George Miller that's like, I need it to feel like it's lived in? Can we just make someone come down the stairs? And then how do you see that and go, beautiful, perfect, great? It, like, sorry, no, that's not. That's distracting.
So I guess I want to just kind of say that this is not better than Fury Road, and it's not better than Road Warrior. But I think it's unfair to try to compare it to the original movies because it's not a Mad Max film. It just takes place in the Mad Max universe. It's telling a different kind of story. It's telling a different kind of narrative of wasteland politics and resource sustainability that I feel is most often skipped in the previous movies, because the previous movies feature so much action and so much like high stakes conflict that you don't have a good understanding of what the wasteland is and why it is. So this kind of retrofits that and explains it a little bit more. Like, for example, the underlings in the Citadel. We see them in the previous movie, and we see people like that in all the other movies, like just wasteland wanderers and scrap collectors. But this gave us a better clue of to what they actually do underground and what they actually do when they're waiting for a Morton Joe to give them water or food or resources. So I think it was a perfect opportunity to like retrofit some of the storytelling that we've missed in previous entries while building the character development of this character that we now know and love. And yeah, it gives it a different tone. It gives it a different energy than the other films. And I was totally fine with it. It didn't have to be a carbon copy of a Mad Max movie. And there are going to be people who expect that. And, you know, that's fine. Just understand that this is a different story. It's not a Mad Max. It's not a Man with No Name. It's not one of those type of movies. This is a character origin, which, man, like you've said it on your podcast and I've said it in plenty of things, like 9 times out of 10, like retrofitted origin stories don't do well for me. I don't like the Hannibal Rising origin story. I don't like, I mean, in a way, I have a problem with the Kelvin timeline of the Star Trek movies, like, because it doesn't feel right. Mm-hmm. I get that it's supposed to be different. It's a different timeline, but I don't generally like it when they have to go back and retrofit and prequel stuff. And this one, I was 90% cool with.
And I think that's a really great point to compare why I went into this movie the way I did, because I could have watched Fury Road before going in. I probably could have found time to do it. Yeah. But I figured this is a prequel. I want to, as someone who has never been invested in this universe, has never seen a movie in this universe, I want to see how much of this movie makes me go, okay, this is the moment where Han Solo gets his blaster. This is the moment where Indiana Jones gets. I wanted to see how much of that stuff was just blindingly obvious. And the only thing in this movie that I felt was blindingly obvious is the fact that they have to get to the point where she loses her arm and she gets the mechanical arm, and that's it. And like that's, I think the only problem I have with that entire quote unquote arc is the fact that I previously talked about dropped plot points. Throughout most of the movie, she's been tattooing star charts on her arm to help her find her way back home.
Yeah.
I thought that was going to be a point of contention where Dementus has run Gastown to the ground, or
You thought it was going to be a Waterworld situation with the tattoo on the girl's back.
yeah, basically I thought it was going to be someone finds a star chart, deduces what it is, cuts off her arm, and she has to stop them from getting there.
Right.
Like, it's tropey, but in this universe, it's interesting and it's compelling because we see how idyllic that world is, and we've seen what Dementus can do to resources. And so it's a race against time to see if you can stop him from getting there and destroying her home. But the star chart really plays no role in anything other than people see it and they're like, that's weird. And then she loses the arm, and we don't even know if anyone saw the star chart on her arm afterward. Like, maybe it got rubbed off when she got her arm smashed between the giant monster truck tire. It just never really comes back to anything. And
it does in Fury Road. Like, essentially what you're getting set up for that is she does not know her way home. All she knows is that it's east. And Fury Road, there are backstory plot points of where it's like she's actually spent her adult life sneaking away from the Citadel and finding a way back home because she doesn't have her map anymore.
Okay.
So that story is concluded in Fury Road, and I thought it was brilliant because, like, I was wondering too. It's like, okay, so is someone going to steal that? I thought the same thing.
Yeah, it's
going to be a MacGuffin. Going to figure out what it is. But really, what it does, it just explains her journey now of like all she knows is home is east, and there are story points in Fury Road where it's like she has spent time making connections in the wasteland to get home. That's what she spent her whole adult life doing, while under the guise of being the new Praetorian for the Citadel and being able to have so much command and control. So the story, that plot point does resolve itself in Fury Road. So when you go back and watch it, you'll get it. But yeah, it is kind of like an unnecessary plot point, but it has enough resolution in its predecessing film that I didn't mind it. I was afraid that it was going to be a Waterworld situation and people were going to want the map. That's what I really thought it was going to be too. And I was happy when it didn't turn out that way.
Yeah, and I didn't think it would be like Immortan Joe finds it and Dementus finds it, and like it just becomes like a race between all of them. I thought it was going to just be specifically Dementus, and I thought Immortan Joe was just going to be like a cameo to be like, hey, he's the guy with the mask and everything. I thought it was going to just be a consistent clash between Furiosa and Dementus, and the movie does take a veer more into her rise into the Citadel, within the Citadel. And I don't think it's awful, and I don't think it's bad in any stretch of the imagination. But without that foreknowledge of what the star map where and when that star map story gets concluded in the moment, and not having experienced that previously, it felt just like a story thread that was dropped because that's not where they wanted to resolve the story.
To go into like a massive spoiler, I'm not going to give it all away, but the ending, the final conflict and the resolution between Furiosa and Dementus, I liked it, but it seemed so much more macabre than I was expecting. Like, there's a real kind of, I don't know, like Edgar Allan Poe-ish kind of gothic twist to the resolution of her and Dementus's conflict, where she just doesn't go out and kill him, or tear him apart with motorcycles like he does with all of his victims, or torture him like he did her mother. And they show all the different things, and that's where I love, like, there is a man with no name kind of mythology towards the end, where the all-knowing man is narrating all the different rumors and myths of what Furiosa did to Dementus. But what really happened from the lips of her own mouth, told to me, is she did this particular gruesome thing to him. I liked that twist. I liked that Edgar Allan Poe-ish kind of disturbing thing, but it doesn't really translate into her character in Fury Road, like the person that she grows up to be. And it kind of does a thing that I really did not like in Red Dragon, the other
The Hannibal Lecter prequel, yeah.
origin story, where we are going to immediately connect the current story with its predecessor. So, for example, in Red Dragon, after all the stuff happens with Will Graham and the Tooth Fairy, blah, 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 immediately you hear a knock on the window, and it's supposed to be Clarice Starling talking to Hannibal Lecter, as if, oh, this just happened immediately after. This movie kind of does that.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to say it shit the bed for me, but it literally immediately ends and leads right into the beginning moments of what would be happening behind the scenes in Fury Road. I thought it was just a little bit too cliche for me. Again, it didn't ruin the movie for me, but I was just like, oh, come on, just end with the macabre stuff. Don't try and tie these two together. We already know it's a prequel. We don't need that hold my hand into the next story motif. But maybe that's just something that Miller thought a lot of his audience was going to need, because he does throw a lot of exposition and a lot of different nuance through the film. Maybe he figured that some people in the audience did need that hand-holding moment. For sure, my mom would. Like, my mom loves Fury Road, but I know that she would. My mom is the type of audience member who'd be like, oh my gosh, and it just leads right into the next one. I'm not that way, but she totally is. So I get it.
I think that was probably, I mean, it's the end. It's a moment where I was just like, I don't see how that hit the ending with Dementis leads into her being like, I'm going to liberate everyone from the life that I had.
Right.
That's probably the big character moment that never truly is ever visualized in the movie. It's just, that's her next step in this journey, is she's going to be a liberator. But it's like, how, what shouldn't she still just be trying to get home? Like, there shouldn't be, there's a step missing here. And maybe it's that CGI step that awful person is coming down. I don't know. But there is something that's just kind of sort of missing in that narrative for that character story beat.
Oh, I'm curious to hear what our friend Justin Henson has to say about this movie.
I did invite him on, but today's his long day at work, so he couldn't make it for the morning.
Yeah. So I know that he and I have different opinions when it comes to storytelling and world building, where, you know, he doesn't like it when they hold your hand the whole thing. And there is a lot of hand holding through this movie. And I feel it's kind of necessary for, like you said, Miller understands that if he can't make a film as good as Fury Road, and I know he never will, like, Fury Road is such a rarity of almost being like a perfect movie, where I was really nervous knowing that they were going to make a Furiosa film. Like, oh, how are you going to do that? And then just going in with the expectation, like, you know, it's not going to be better. And if it is, wow, like, hats off to you, applause. It's not better. It does do a lot of things and a lot of tropes that I'm not a huge fan of, but I understand why they're there. And if I can understand why they're there, and that he's actually making a movie for audiences and not just for himself and his cronies like some other filmmakers do, where it's like, hey, I don't give a shit if you don't understand what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. I think Paul Thomas Anderson is like the perfect example of that. It's like, he's not making movies for audiences. He's making movies for him and his pretentious film buddies. And pretentious film people love his movies more than just regular film goers. And I think that's fine, but he knows who his audience is. I think Fury Road, he had to do a little bit of hand-holding with exposition and character building, and having some of those characters from the previous entry in the series to create a sense of familiarity. At least we didn't have the terrible, why are we naming Han Solo moment? You know, I didn't feel like there was any of that in this movie, where I just rolled my eyes. I was like, are you shitting me right now? At least it didn't go that far in the hand holding, but yeah, there's some hand holding.
I definitely agree with that, the naming contrivance, because I thought maybe in the trailers we see the moment where she says, I am Praetorian Furiosa, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, okay, maybe that's the moment where she like accepts her wasteland name or whatever.
Right.
Instead, one of the first words we hear from the movie once the actual movie starts, from what is essentially the prologue, is Valkyrie saying Furiosa. It's like, oh, okay, that was her name the whole time. Fine, good, let's move on.
Well, and Valkyrie is a great name too. Like, I think the character world building that some people might miss is the fact that the people in the green place, like her tribe, Valvolini, I think is what they're called, Vuvolini, they know that that world of theirs has a timer on it. Like, it's not going to last forever. They're going to get raided, or environmentally is going to get destroyed. So they're creating this generation of warriors. Everyone that's in, like, Furiosa is a warrior name. Valkyrie is a warrior name. I think that they are raising these children to be survivors and warriors, even though it seems like they live in a pacifist community based off of what we see. And in Fury Road, it definitely explains that a lot more as you see what that tribe has become. It's a great, great story point. But yeah, it didn't need oh, she's furious, we'll call her Furiosa. You know, it didn't
Yeah,
need
and like
that.
that's I mean, with the way Chris Hemsworth was hamming it up, like that's just a perfect line of dialogue that could have come from there. Oh, you're a feisty one,
No, agreed. So, I mean, this is my question to you, man. Did you like this movie enough to make you go back and want to watch the other films? Like, did it do it enough for you as a newbie walking into this saga, this prequel of a saga, to at least pique your interest in, like, okay, so what are all these people talking about with Mad Max? Like, why is it such? I mean, remember, the first 3 films were cult movies. They were not box office smashes. They had a very niche audience. So the fact that Fury Road was able to garnish enough attention and appreciation from audience members of all types and be Oscar nominated for effects and editing and sound design and costumes, like, I don't think people expected a sequel to a cult trilogy to be so influential in filmmaking that now it's getting its own, like, expanded universe. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm going to preface my answer with just a little bit of, like, I've been aware of Mad Max for a while. I remember the first time I ever heard the word Mad Max and Thunderdome, I was watching the previews ahead of the VHS copy of Robot Jocks that my dad bought me. And my dad and I were watching
Nice.
we were getting ready to watch Robot Jocks, and he saw Beyond Thunderdome, or whatever was being, whatever was the trailer attached to it. And my dad goes, "Oh, Mad Max. I'll have to check out on that." And I was like, "Mad Max, okay. Dad likes Mad Max. Let's try to remember that." And I remember seeing him, like, watching things every now and then, because my mom and dad went on a big Mel Gibson kick just before The Patriot came out. Like, I think Lethal Weapon 4 was getting ready to be released, and like, oh man, all the Lethal Weapons are on VHS. We got to get them all.
Yeah, dude, he ruled the 80s and 90s, man. I don't think a lot of people remember how huge Mel Gibson was.
I mean, Maverick, as awful as some of the people involved in that movie are, Maverick is still one of my favorite Westerns of all time. Like, it's a tie-in to a movie or a TV show that is also its own thing, but
literally bought it on Blu-ray
Nice.
yesterday.
Nice. I didn't know it was out on Blu-ray. I might have to try and find that on Amazon.
Oh, and guess what I also got for $1?
Yeah, boy.
Because we have to watch it
Yeah,
now.
we do. Yeah, about time. Coming soon
Anyways.
to the Cultworthy. But I think this conversation more or less has given me more cause to go back and at least watch Fury Road. I don't know that I'll go back and watch the original trilogy. Maybe we'll see what Fury Road does for me.
All you have to do is watch Road Warrior. Like, you really don't have to watch Mad Max. You don't have to watch Beyond Thunderdome. Beyond Thunderdome closes it up enough to make you realize that Tom Hardy may not be the same character from the third one. But yeah, Road Warrior is absolutely seminal in this type of filmmaking. And if you liked Fury Road, you can literally just watch the Road Warrior and stop. Like,
okay.
I love all of them, but as a person suggesting movies in a series, especially if that's not your gig, you just have to watch those two. Fury Road and Road Warrior will do everything you need to get the Mad Max out of your system.
Well, I'm a completionist by nature, so if I start the Road Warrior, I'll probably at the very least have a morbid curiosity about the other movies, even Beyond Thunderdome.
It's true.
So, like, I could see myself going into it a little further. It's just a matter of having access to them. But I do think this conversation did more for me in wanting to at least go back and see Fury Road, especially finding out that the Star Map storyline is actually being alluded to going into Fury Road, and not just like the actual plot line just got dropped in this. So I was like, okay, well, that gives me more reason to go in because I have this curiosity now about that plot line. So I think if we're going to go into the talking smack ratings from here, I think if you are invested in the Mad Max story, if you've seen Fury Road, this is definitely a must see. I can 100% understand why anyone who has seen Fury Road is excited for this and would want to see it. If you're like me and you have never seen a Mad Max movie, I would say caveated, creating a new category for our ranking system. Watch Fury Road, then come back for this, because it seems like there is a lot of foreknowledge from that movie, at least, that needs to be known to appreciate what this movie is trying to say.
It's totally fair. I agree with that 100%. And that is, I think, one of the reasons why legacy prequels have a hard time in the box office or finding like a real audience, because it's an expectation that you are already invested in the subject matter at hand, right?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why Solo was such an epic failure financially, is because it was marketed to a generation that grew up with the prequels and not necessarily the original trilogy. I mean, the original trilogy will never lose its popularity, but I mean, if you were born in 1995, right? So you're going to be 29 years old, almost 30.
Between 4 and 9 by the time the prequel trilogy starts and ends.
Right. Your first theatrical Star Wars experience was more than likely the prequels. And then the TV stuff like Clone Wars, right? That was your Star Wars. And then Dad's Star Wars was something you would watch just to humor him. Han Solo wasn't as much of an important piece of that mythology as Anakin, as young Obi-Wan, and all that stuff were for the prequel people. Like, I know a lot of people who are Star Wars fans that couldn't name all the characters in the original trilogy. So I think it was like a split audience on Solo. Plus, I mean,
I think part of Solo was also just how transparent it was of, this is where he gets his jacket, this is where he gets his blaster, this is how he gets the Millennium Falcon, which even him getting the Millennium Falcon is a tacked on glorified post-credits scene. By the end of the movie, by the end of the main story of the movie, he does not have the Millennium Falcon in his possession. It's not until we get an epilogue that, again, feels more like a post-credits, where he wins the Hand of Sabachthani and he wins the Falcon. And it's one of those things that we don't need that story. We got enough context from Empire Strikes Back when we meet Lando.
Well, and it also kind of sullies the legacy of the character. Like, there is a mystere to Han Solo that I feel is better left untold. Mm-hmm. It's like we don't want to see too much of the history of Jack Sparrow either, because it might ruin the idea of the character that we had become accustomed to and used to. And there is a mysterious flamboyancy to him. It's like, what if we saw a prequel that explains why he is so flamboyant or why he's always drunk on rum? Like, there's a lot of stuff that we just want to leave alone. Rogue One, I thought, did it right, because now you're telling a story in a world that we're familiar with, about a topic we're familiar with, but we're given all new characters to play with. We're not having to go back and retrofit our mythology that was already created to fit a narrative that we just don't really want to see. And I think it's where Solo failed. And in a way, I think it's some of the series on Disney Plus kind of failed too, where it's like, Mandalorian, I'll watch that all day, but don't bring back too many throwbacks of characters from the original trilogy that I already have an appreciation of the mysteriousness of their character. Like Boba Fett, I didn't need to see that. I didn't want that.
Leave him dead.
I like the fact that Boba Fett was just mysterious. Yeah. And I feel this is the kind of the same thing. At least we're not going back and telling a Max origin story or like a Warlord origin story. Furiosa was a fascinating character that they literally just throw into Fury Road. So we are okay with learning more about her, because we got one movie that showed how much of a badass she was and just enough backstory to like understand her motivation. And this just kind of nails it home. That's why I agree with you. Like, if you're a noob to Road Warrior, Mad Max, I say it's a must see just for the visual majesty of it. I mean, this is a film that I'm going to have a hard time wanting to watch on a small screen, because now I feel spoiled having watched it on IMAX.
And that's one of the things that never brought me back to Fury Road, is I always heard about how amazing it was to see on the big screen. And I was like, well, I'm kind of missing out on the sound and the big screen and all that. But I mean, I'm also not the kind of person that I'm like, oh man, if only I was looking at this on my big screen. I could watch it on. I've got a 32-inch in this room. I've got a 70-inch TV in the basement. Like I can watch it on either one, and I'd be happy. As long as I'm
Just sit
invested in
really
it.
close, and it'll feel like the big screen.
There you go. But yeah, you haven't given your official Talking Smack rating, so must see, pass, caveated.
I don't know. There's no caveat for me. It's a must see on all accounts. Like I said, if you're not a Mad Max aficionado, just see it for the majesty of it. And also, Anya Taylor-Joy is just really damn good. I mean, she's good in everything, but this is an actor who I have an appreciation, especially for female actors these days, where yes, they can be glamorous and they can be fashion icons like she's become now, even though she really started her career off in horror. You know, she started off with The Witch and Split and that terrible New Mutants movie. But
say, yeah,
she's definitely
she was
become
wonderfully cast as Magic in New Mutants, and it's a shame that
the movie did not live up
exactly.
to it.
Yeah, that casting was like top tier. If Dan and I had gotten to her Anya Taylor-Joy as Magic would have been a top tier casting just from visual look alone.
I feel like she was a perfect person to play young Charlize Theron, because I feel Charlize Theron's the exact same. She's one of the most beautiful women on earth, but she's an amazingly talented actress who can do any genre. She's not going to be just stifled into romantic comedies all the time, or, you know,
which I'm
whatever
grateful for,
drama.
because
Like,
Sweet November is one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
it's pretty bad. But that's my point, is that they are so good at their craft and they're so watchable, even with no dialogue. Like, she only has 30 lines of dialogue, and you don't need more. Like, she does everything that she needs to do with her eyes. There's parts of this movie where her face is covered up almost the entire time, and she's just doing this character through her eyes, and the eyes are enough. So I think that's another reason why it's a must-see for me, is like, just that performance is fantastic.
I think that goes back to what we were talking about with Chris Hemsworth, where maybe George Miller is kind of his James Cameron to his Arnold Schwarzenegger, because I think Anya Taylor-Joy is at her best when she is face acting, when she's using her assets, which are her eyes.
Agreed. And her cheekbones.
Yeah, and George Miller, the way he frames his shots, like that, he is maximizing her ability to act without having her say a single line.
100%.
I think that he utilized her wonderfully and perfectly in this movie. I do think there are some very obvious ADR moments where either they brought in Charlize Theron to dub over the dialogue because maybe she couldn't quite get the pitch,
the cadence.
Yeah. Or maybe again, she just couldn't get it on the day. So they came in and they like had her sitting in the studio and just working her way down the ladder so they could pitch it properly or get the cadence right. Because there are a couple moments where I was just like, I don't know if that's her speaking right now.
100%. I know exactly what scenes you're talking about. Like, that sounds so much like Charlize right now, but I don't know. But yeah, definitely a must see, and I will see it at least one more time in the theater before it leaves, which I'm sure it'll be there for a while. But it was a majestic film to see on the big screen, as you know, the Fury Road was as well. And it got me excited to go out to the theater, and it's getting me excited to go out and see it again. So it's definitely a must see for me.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap up here. Antonio, once again, please let everyone know where they can find you on their favorite podcatchers.
So you can find me on any major podcasting platform under the Cultworthy Podcast, as well as Back to the Balcony. Both shows are on YouTube, and you can go to thecultworthy.com to find all the newest episodes and links to all of my favorite guests and production partners in the Cultworthy Partners page. Josh Scar is one of them. And yeah, we kind of just alluded to it. We will be doing an episode on About Time, which I'm excited because he's been telling me for like 3 years now to watch it. I finally just grabbed the DVD because I'm like, if it's $1 at the thrift store, that's cheaper than renting it if it's not streaming somewhere. And if I like it enough, well, now I got it. So
Back to the Balcony, easily one of my favorite shows to listen to every week. If for no other reason, even if I don't know what movie you guys are talking about, it's just the beautiful tones of Antonio and Justin's voices hitting my eardrums. Just it's the best part of my week, other than listening to like Dan when he's going solo, because he gets that soft British cadence going.
I know. I want to like have a nice warm cup of tea and just fall asleep.
Exactly.
To his soothing tones.
He could read me the dictionary all by himself, and I'm good. This is like 4 weeks in a row where Dan's getting a whole lot of love. He's going to start thinking
he needs it. He needs that
true.
love.
Maybe give him a little ego boost. Just let him know he's doing good work. But Antonio, thank you so much for being here and pushing me to go see this movie. I am happy that I did it. Excuse me. But for those of you listening, thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Please follow Antonio. Hit subscribe on YouTube on your favorite podcatcher. He's been doing a lot of good work on YouTube, so show him some love. Don't forget to join our Discord. The link is in the episode description. And don't forget, next week is episode 150. It's going to be a big one. We're going to be doing 30-some talking Smackdowns, and it's going to be hectic, but we're going to get through it, and it's going to be a whole lot of fun. I'm at the point this episode is coming out, I have cut off submissions. So if you have not gotten a submission in yet, we'll carry it over to next time, but we won't have the raffle probably. Maybe we will. It'll be episode 200, so maybe we need to do another raffle. But it's going to be exciting, and it'll be out next week. So please tune in for that. It's a big one, obviously, 150 episodes. You can follow us starting over. Don't forget to join the Discord. It's in our episode description below. You can email us at tsmackpod@gmail.com. You can follow us on all the social media platforms at Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, Hive Social, Post News, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Lonnie's website. We are at Talking Smack Pod. Thank you to Leo Allen for the musical themes and Beppo for original avatars, Retro AL Studios for our Ricky avatar. Please like, subscribe, rate, review on your podcatcher of choice. Don't forget, all you have to do to leave a review is let us know if you'd rather listen to the podcast or watch Madam Web. And most importantly, again, thank you so much for listening. Please take care. Watch Star Trek.
Who loves T-Smack?
I love T-Smack. Is it true? Mm-hmm. I do. Ooh.